what made you write your book? And because I do want to unpack that a little bit and talk about the aching heart. I think that will appeal to many of my listeners who may struggle with anxiety or depression or just kind of life and all that we juggle as women. And we have our families, we have our work. Thank goodness you're writing a book about that. Tell us a little bit about what made you write that book.
So I found out when I was 18 years old that I was born with a somewhat rare medical condition that would prevent me from having children. And my circumstance was quite unique because most people, when they walk through infertility or some type of childlessness, they do so in the context of a marriage. And I was a freshman in college, and I had received this diagnosis over Thanksgiving. And a person's fertility is such an intimate part of them. And I felt just so alone in that journey. I've always been a big reader, and I walked out of the doors of the doctor's office and into the doors of the local Barnes and Noble to kind of buy books that would help me through that struggle, because it really did flip a lot of my life on its head. It wasn't obviously how I would have planned, how I was planning on my life to go. And but what I discovered was that there were very, very few books on the topic at all. But I didn't fit into any of the categories. It was either very specific miscarriage or infertility, and neither one of those quite defined me. So what I did instead was bought every book on suffering I could find and read those. Really, I grew up in a Christian home. I had considered myself a Christian for most of my life, but this was my first personal encounter with suffering and really wrestled with the Lord through that. And it wasn't this quick and easy process. It was months of there's actually a little prayer chapel on Liberty's campus, and I would go pretty frequently and just wrestle in prayer there because it was private. And at that time, I didn't feel comfortable sharing with a lot of people. I didn't know how, and I was still grieving that. But I mean, it was a decade later that I chose to write Longing for Motherhood. And I did that very intentionally to give myself time to heal and to write from a scar, not a fresh wound. But I wrote the book I wish I'd had. And I've been very intentional with the language of childlessness to incorporate myself, certainly people who have walked through infertility or experienced miscarriage, but also single women who desire to be mothers and that desire isn't being fulfilled, birth mothers who have made an adoption plan for their children and they don't have their children anymore, women who have experienced abortion and don't have their children anymore. I really wanted to be pretty inclusive in that because, there's dozens of ways that childlessness can play out, but really wanted to, I wrote the book I wish I'd had, and kind of my goal was if I can help one woman, A, not feel alone, but B, fix her eyes on who God is in the midst of struggle, it will have been worth it. And, another thing I've been very intentional with is some of the books, and I mean this with the most gracious heart, but some of the books I had read on suffering really rubbed me the wrong way because the book ended, the person's story, they ended the book with getting what they wanted, tying a nice little bow on their story. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that at all. But what frustrated me about those books was that was the conclusion. I trusted God and I got what I wanted. And that's just not life.